Safe Schools Act is an initiative of the Epilepsy Foundation. It actually started in, I want to say 2018 in Kentucky, led by a young person, which I think is just so crucial to what this bill does and what it's about. Someone who had participated in our Teens Speak Up fly-in in Washington, D.C., had come to D.C., and then met with her members of Congress, learned about civics, and then went back and wanted to make change in her state. And what she really was worried about was that people in the schools were not trained to recognize seizures, to provide seizure first aid. And so she started a legislative effort in her home state of Kentucky. I think it's a really great, inspiring story of a young person really making change for themselves and their friends. And then, start spurring a whole movement across the country of states taking on this legislation. So, why do we need this bill? That's the first thing any, legislator is going to ask you. So I don't need to tell the people on this call, epilepsy is still misunderstood by the public. Misunderstood what a seizure is like, who has epilepsy, how many people have epilepsy. Meanwhile, you've got children spending most of their time in school, while school personnel mostly are members of the general public. There's a real decline in the number of school nurses available in schools. So you have schools with no one with any kind of medical training on campus, and so you've got those general ideas about what epilepsy looks like and how it's to be treated, which means school personnel aren't trained on the latest information, and it's really crucial that students have a safe and enriching environment to learn, to build friendships, to be able to fully participate in their schools. Some of the other things that we had heard stories of was schools. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't do that. Okay. Schools not administering rescue medications that needed to be administered, or schools having policies like, well, if you have a seizure, then we have to call 911 and you have to go to the ER, and then students not being able to finish their school day. And for some students, obviously not all, every student is different, but some students with epilepsy might be able to have a seizure in the morning, lay down in the nurse's office if there is one, and then go back to school and finish the school day. We want kids to be learning. We want kids to be in school. Meanwhile, I've got some stats on the side here that epilepsy is very common, as you all know. 1 in 10 people will experience a seizure, 1 in 26 will develop epilepsy with their lifetime, and we've got a lot of kids in school with epilepsy or having seizures in school. Okay, so the goals were to train school personnel, including nurses, teachers, volunteers, anyone that fell under the umbrella of school personnel. Make sure that they could respond and recognize seizures. Second, make sure that medication could be administered, primarily rescue medication. And then make sure there was awareness among the whole school environment. Not necessarily like this kid in your class has epilepsy, but in general, we wanted to make clear, when we're talking about training for the whole school, that's not, or training for school personnel, that's not, you have a kid with epilepsy in your classroom this year, so you're going to do this training. No, all school personnel are trained. All students gain awareness of epilepsy. Then if there is a student with epilepsy, that student has their seizure action plan that's specific to them. And that's shared with just the school personnel who need to know that information. So there's both a specific element and a general element. Just some numbers, we pulled from the CDC here with, 42,900 Oregonians with epilepsy and 5,400 children with epilepsy in Oregon. Those children on average are missing about 11 or more. Why does this keep happening? 11 or more days of school. And there's it's covering up one school nurse for every 3,142 children. That's not nearly enough. And while we are allied with the School Nurses Association and wanting there to be more school nurses, we also want kids with epilepsy to be in school and able to learn. We also run a legal, this is a side note, we also run a legal defense fund. And we got a call one time from a family in the Midwestern United States saying, they told me that my daughter can only go to school on the days the school nurse is there, and the school nurse is there 2 days a week. Just terrible. One, illegal, and also, really depriving that child of an education. So this is about making sure that kids with epilepsy are where they're supposed to be, which is in school learning. Okay, there is a specific emphasis on anti-seizure medications and rescue therapies. It's really important that people who need rescue medications, those are medications given while you're having a seizure. I think the ones a lot of us are most familiar with is Diastat, but also Nasalam and some others. Access to these medications is really important while on school grounds. If you're having a seizure and you need access to your medication, your rescue medication, you need it right now. Sorry, maybe my slides are on some kind of timer, I don't know. You need access to medication right now. And you could have a seizure at any moment. And again, there might not be a school nurse on campus. So you need school personnel to be trained. Again, as part of that seizure action plan, someone trained and designated on how to administer your medication so that you can receive it while you are in school. And that was something that a lot of students have faced barriers, and families have faced barriers in getting those medications administered at school, either because of controlled substance rules or because of route of administration. Okay, so our model bill has 5 key components. One, like I brought up, requiring school personnel to complete a seizure recognition and seizure first aid training. 2, mandating that a seizure action plan is available or created for every student and made part of the file, so that school personnel or volunteers who are responsible for the student are aware of what that plan is. Ensuring any FDA approved medication that is prescribed by the physician can be administered. Educating the students and personnel about a general awareness of epilepsy, and as well as a Good Samaritan clause. And Good Samaritan clauses provide protection for people who are reasonably, trying to assist someone. So we do it. There's a couple of other, components that are. Let me go back. So it requires all these trainings. Those trainings are available to the schools for free and to the states for free through the Epilepsy Foundation. We are lucky enough to partner with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention at the federal level. They fund our work in this to develop these trainings and offer them to the public for free. And that's really great, because then when we go to the states, we can say, here's this bill, here's all the reasons we needed to pass, and we can do it without a fiscal note, basically without a cost to the state legislature, because it's already being financed by the federal government. So we have in the past done in-person trainings and online trainings. With the pandemic, that has shifted basically online. So this is just a little more information about what those trainings are. So the school nurse training is the one that's the most involved, as you can imagine. It's continuing education for people who are already nurses on some of the most, to keep them up to date on where we are in seizure treatment. So, when they take this course, they're supposed to be able to identify the most common seizure types, 3 ways the treatment may affect a student's health, safety, or learning, 2 strategies to alleviate psychosocial challenges. So this is a little broader than just epilepsy treatment, but what are the things facing children with epilepsy? 3 first aid steps, and then how to create a seizure action plan. And you notice again, the first set of those, generally common seizures, ways to identify, first aid steps, that's general training about epilepsy in general. And then there's also the specific seizure action plans for each student. On the side of this slide here, we have our seizure first aid poster. And I think this is a really good example of that point of needing to be up to date on the most recent information. So, one of the myths that's out there in the world is that you should put something in someone's mouth while they're having a seizure. I don't know where this came from. It seems to still pervade the general public. So for a long time, we had on our posters, do not put anything in their mouth. Well, then we on the market, we got these rescue medications that were actually meant to be put in the mouth. So we need to sort of, tweak it. So I think that's a good example of what we're trying to do both in the general training and the school nurse training is, in general, make sure the public is aware of what they are supposed to do if someone is having a seizure, but also make sure we're staying up to date with the latest information, especially teaching, school nurses who may have learned in training, don't put anything in someone's mouth. But now, there's this new medication on the market. That's going to be really important for them to know. So that's the school nurse training. There's also training for personnel. And if you notice, the school nurse training is much more involved, approximately 2 3/4 hours. The school personnel one is less intense and again, designed for a non-medical person, but it's about recognizing seizures, supporting students with seizures, providing seizure first aid. And that also comes with continuing education credits. So these are, teachers and nurses and a lot of licensed personnel are required to do continuing education for anyway. Again, to stay up to date. If you're a lawyer or a speech language pathologist or a doctor, you're supposed to do continuing education. So those credits are available when they take our courses. And again, these are all free. So both the template seizure action plan, I'll show you next, the seizure first aid posters, observation tools, parent questionnaires, we offer all those resources for free, as well as the trainings. Okay, so I talked a little bit about, the bill overall is about making sure that kids with epilepsy can stay in school. So general seizure first aid, general, seizure recognition, make all that training for the personnel. But the other half of that is the seizure action plan. The action plan is supposed to be individualized to each student and include their seizures, seizure types, triggers, medications, other information. Information specific to the child, like when to call 911. So you'll notice there's some boxes on, when to call 911, but you could also, tailor that. For example, so the reason I work at the Epilepsy Foundation is my sister had epilepsy, and if she had a seizure in the evening, that was okay. We're gonna see how this goes. Give her medication. Maybe not necessarily call 911. But we told the school she rarely has seizures during the day, so does something's going on. So just call 911 immediately. Like she needs to go to the hospital because that's so out of the ordinary. Other students might be different. Every person with epilepsy is going to have a different treatment plan and response. So this is meant to be individualized, and it's also meant to be led by the child's physician and parent. And I would hope, as developmentally appropriate, them as well. Once they're in high school and can provide input on management of their seizures. We've heard stories from maybe a school has a school nurse, and that school nurse says, nope, I will only, provide this one type of treatment. I will only provide this one medication. And that's not what the physician has prescribed. That's not what the family wants. So we hope that this can help put the family a little more in the driver's seat. And then finally, again, any information needed, to provide care specific to that child. Okay. I'm going through these slides pretty fast, so we might end up wrap up pretty early, but I hope we have a lot of time for questions and discussion. The legislation itself is kind of straightforward. It's about training school personnel. It's about making students can stay in school, getting the medications that they need, and the response to those students, the response to the seizures being individualized. So we have had a lot of success. I think, in part, like I said, because the bill doesn't have a cost attached to it. They started in Kentucky just a couple of years ago, and it's now passed in 12 states. I've worked at other organizations where we, run state level campaigns with staffs of 20 to 30 people who just focus on state policy. Whereas we've done this with one person at national who's in charge of it, And then, our executive directors out there like Kevin, who are also doing a bunch of other jobs, and then just some really, really engaged volunteers. I think it also really shows that this resonates with state legislators. They're interested, they're excited, and this is great momentum. Now, of course, 12 is not 50, but the momentum that we've had in the last couple of years really, really helps, especially if you can show that neighboring states or states with similar profiles have passed the bill. So I think it's great, bodes well for Oregon that Washington already passed the bill last year and it's being implemented in Washington. Our two states may have some rivalry, but are mostly friends, and mostly look at each other and what we're doing in Salem and Olympia there. So where are we now with Seizure Safe Schools? So the Oregon state legislature will start again in January. That's how most state legislatures are. They usually convene at the beginning of the year. And so folks at the Oregon chapter are currently, meeting with legislators, looking for sponsors, building those champions. I think I have it right that we don't yet have the name of someone who will introduce the bill. Hopefully, as soon as we do, we can share that with you. Okay, Kevin is nodding at me. So right now we're in that phase of shopping it around, making sure people are aware. And by we, I mean folks in Oregon. I can't give him credit for any of this. This is Kevin. Making sure people are aware and building that groundwork for when the state legislature starts, being able to introduce the bill. And people have already heard of it. They're might be interested. They might be able to say, oh, I think this is something that we really, really should move. So this graphic, it's a little hard to read on the screen, but I wanted to provide a little bit on back to I'm just a bill, on how a bill becomes a law. Now the picture there is of Washington, D.C., not Salem, but the process is very similar, which is, and we're at the very beginning, right at the top, with the bill being written, and we haven't yet had the bill introduced. But we're hoping that we'll be able to move through this process next year. So after the bill is introduced, then it goes to the committee consideration. So right now, when I said we're like working on building champions and getting sponsors, we don't have to just meet with the people who are going to introduce the bill. We have to meet with the people who run the committees the bill needs to go through so that they say, oh yeah, I've heard about this. This is great. I should move it through my committee. Because if the person who runs that committee doesn't know what it is, doesn't want to work on it, that's how a bill dies in committee. So you go through you get introduced, you have to be introduced in both the House and the Senate. You go through committee in both the House and the Senate. That committee might make amendments, they might make changes. And we've done that in a couple of states. So if you look at the bills across the states, they're not identical. We have a model bill that we put forward, but there sometimes are tweaks based on things that a different legislator might want, a compromise. Sometimes we've compromised with School Superintendents Association or the School Nurses Association. Now there's some compromises we won't take, but there's some that we will. And so that's just, a process we have to work out where we can see, what do we need to do to get this bill passed, but also what are we willing to give up on and not willing to give up on. Okay, so it goes into committee, it's amended in committee, goes to the floor, and both the House and the Senate could be amended on the floor. Then you might end up with two different two different versions of the bill. So then you have to resolve those differences, make sure it's passed by both the House and the Senate again. Then it goes to the governor and becomes law. So, it's a hard process, but again, we've been really successful in a lot of states. It's been very exciting. Usually then it's pretty great because we get to, we might be back to doing in-person signing ceremonies again in 2022. We'll see, but usually that's great because we can get folks who worked on the bill, they're in Salem. I can't make any promises about if things are going to be in person, but before the pandemic, we had some really great signing ceremonies in states with the governors. So going back a slide, Like I said, in Oregon, there's still, meeting with legislators really at the beginning of that process. So now the question is, well, what if you want to get involved? Here I have our advocacy network, our Speak Up, Speak Out network, with a little bit.ly there. If you know how to use a bit.ly link, just type that into your browser. And that is how you can sign up for our newsletter. Now, if you sign up now, you're probably not going to get Oregon Seizure Safe Schools email. It's not going to be your first email. You're probably going to get an email about the national level because Congress is in session, and I don't think the Oregon State Legislature is. So, but you will also, in addition to getting our national updates, you'll also get Oregon specific updates, including things like when it's time to take action, to let your legislator know that Seizure Safe Schools is moving and it's time to vote on it, or it's time to sign up to co-sponsor, or whatever makes sense in the process. So I would encourage you to get involved. Again, it's been really exciting. We've had great momentum across the country. Really hope Oregon can be 2022 state. And that's my last slide. So I think that, we have a lot of time for questions. Just a little bit more, that's our bit.ly link on how to sign up for the Advocacy Network. And then always just a reminder that Epilepsy Foundation is here for you, either information on epilepsy.com or through our hotline, where you can get information on a variety of topics, be it from I can't afford the medications, or how do I navigate, this health insurance thing, or for example, that family from West Virginia that called us, that they called this line. We were able to get involved and say, sorry, I didn't say they were from West Virginia before. The family whose school wasn't letting their daughter go to school. We were able to get involved and say, this is illegal. Students need to be in school, and you need to come up with a different way to serve this child. So I'd encourage you to reach out if you need any of that. And then I'd like to open for questions.
So Rachel, we have one question, which I don't know the answer to. I have a guess, but question is, do any of the bills apply to or address college/university settings in addition to K through 12?
I don't believe so. I'm going to call on my colleague Tyler here, who's been also involved in this. Have you heard of it reaching the college level?
So this is going to be one of those things like Rachel talked about when things go into committees, right, and changes are made. This has been one of those things we've had it introduced in a few different settings just to kind of test the waters on there. One of the biggest problems with that is public universities versus private universities. So they've tried it in a couple of instances with public universities because they kind of have a little bit more say there. And that has very quickly become as close to a non-starter as we've gotten on any of these in there, in terms of that never lasts long. And so they all have different flavors of, some are only public schools, some are public and private, but across the board, it's pretty much been K through 12.
And that's what I believe Washington, because all of the language, everything I was hearing was K through 12, K through 12. So it's funny, I mean, universities never occurred to me during this whole process that should be included in it. But thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to certainly mention it when we're, drafting and working with the bill. Hope that answered your question. Other ways to get involved, I would suggest, as Rachel said, talking with legislators, if you can identify who your local district representative is, that is kind of the most powerful way to get a meeting, because after all, you voted for them and they have to take a meeting with you. And I am happy to sit in on those meetings. And I've done that with several people, and I can answer all the questions they have. You would essentially just be more or less telling your story and your connection to it. That's really the most powerful thing is, for them. And then we get into, and it's generally, they give you like 15 minutes to meet with them. And sometimes you get lucky, you can actually meet the representative themselves. Sometimes it's just a legislative aide that essentially is taking notes and passing the information on to them. Rachel said, we don't quite yet have a bill sponsor, although I'm 100% positive at this point that if we do, when we do need one or get one, Courtney Neuron will be the sponsor. And she's the first person we met with. It is the district representative for the board member that I'm working with on this bill. And so he contacted her, and we met with her. She's got a big background in schools. She sits on the education committee, which was a win for us already, because that's generally where the bill gets first heard, is in the education committee. So we automatically had to support her. And then we found out during the conversation that her son has epilepsy, which again was another win, and why we know she's going to support it. And then her son jumped on her lap during our conversation, so we got to talk to him. But right now, the bill is sort of kind of in a holding pattern because Courtney, or Representative Neuron, I should refer to her as, she wanted to propose it because this session is so short in 2022. She wanted to propose it as a committee bill, which is a bit like a learning process in itself for me on how that was handled. So apparently it's not a bill sponsor, it's just presented as a committee bill. We then met with the chair of the education committee to talk to her about it. And it's kind of stuck there. She's short-staffed, she was on vacation, it's moving very slowly. She was in support of it, but she said that they hadn't identified what their hot topics are and priorities for the education committee. I didn't rule it out. It's just, so just kind of sitting with her, and we're waiting for her to get back with her. We bugged her. The policy writer is aware that we're anxious. And we've kind of decided as of our last meeting that we may just put it on hold to the 2023 session. And there's bonuses around that, some of which are you can get more advocates. That way you can meet with more folks. We've done some of that already, meeting with the school board associations in Oregon. I can't remember the specific title of it, but they're very much in favor. In Washington, it passed the House 56-0. And that is why, again, I mean, if your district representative is not on the education committee, still meet with them, because ultimately they're going to be voting on it. And they need to know about it. So, and you may get lucky that generally when you share your story, they open up and share their connection, if they have one, to epilepsy. And we found that with some folks. So that's, pretty powerful way to get the word out. So feel free to email me. My email's in the chat. I'm happy to help set up a meeting with your district representative. And, if you're on our email list, that's generally how we get the word out, as updates. Rachel put, that's another way. The national list is we'll continue to update you that way as well. Any other questions for Rachel or Tyler?
Or Kevin, anything you wanted me to cover that I didn't?
No, I think you did a great job in covering the general basis of it. One question did come up that I wasn't quite sure the answer, and I actually threw it out to Britt, and I think she was kind of waiting on it. But question was, what if a school teacher hasn't yet had a chance to take the training, and maybe it's a new hire, and a seizure happens? Is that covered under the Good Samaritan clause? Or, and I've heard that some districts have, and this is in other states, that they've made it the training part of the new hire training or onboarding, which I think is the best idea to do. But again, there's still that, like, what if they miss the training? What would happen? Rachel, do you have any guess on that, or any answer?
This is a guess. This isn't something I've looked into before. I would say, one, if it's going to do two things happening. One, if it was a student who had a seizure but was not known to have epilepsy, I think if not this Good Samaritan clause, but other laws that protect teachers, when they are trying to serve students, would apply. If the student was known to have epilepsy and their new teacher had not been trained and had not been informed of their seizure action plan, I could see the district maybe being in trouble, especially depending on what actually happened with the student, because that is not just, missing a training, but that's also missing a key part of the legislation, which is, informing personnel who are in charge of that student of what their seizure action plan is.
Yeah, Rachel, one thing I can just add to that is, so some of the legislation that's passed already, so like I can use the Indiana one, for instance, they actually address that in the actual writing of the bill. So like, for instance, what Indiana did was, so they set up mandatory training for all school employees who have regular and direct access to children. They have to take that same training course, all that stuff Rachel's breaking down for you. But they have to renew their training every 5 years. And what they specify at the end of that is when you are just hired and every 5 years, you're given a 30-day window. So if that teacher was hired and it had been less than 30 days, they would be covered for not taking that training. But again, that's assuming all those other things that Rachel mentioned aren't true. Like if they hadn't been informed of the seizure action plan, and if there had been a whole thing put in place that was not followed, that's very different. But if it's just strictly a new teacher has come in, they've been there 2 days and they haven't had time to do the training yet, then that's fine. They factor that window in. Other states do exactly what you talked about. Like it's part of just the intake training. And before you even step in to teach a classroom, you have watched all the videos and you have gone through all your training. So that's one of those things where it's another just state by state issue.
And it's also state by state, right? That the frequency of the trainings, how often they have to go through it. And is that determined by the district, each district individually, or by the bill itself? I don't believe it's laid out in the Washington bill.
Yeah, so I think Tyler's read these bills a little more recently than me, but so he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's again part of that negotiation process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as for the other part of your question, that's also part of the negotiation process. Like, is it the board of directors? Sometimes it's just the school board. Sometimes it's the parents and the PTA. Like they all kind of go through and make the specific choices, but that's all negotiated in the actual writing policy. So that goes back to what Rachel talked about on the committees. Like those are the discussions that are had in terms of, well, we should add this or we should take away that and things like that. So there are slight differences between each one. If I remember correctly, on the Washington one, I believe there's no mandated retraining policy. I have it right. Yeah, so there's no mandated retraining policy, but they leave it up to the school board if they want to put one in place. Like, so there's slight differences from state to state.
That's right. I do remember that piece being in the bill.
And I think we've had other states too, where they say, oh, well, our teachers receive their CPR and defibrillator training every 5 years. So we can just wrap this in. So you might not see it reflected in the bill, but it's part of that negotiation with the school district on how to do a lot of similar trainings.
Exactly. Like in Indiana, it's factored into their first aid training.
Right. And Washington has an existing diabetes training as a law. And so they modeled our bill after the diabetes bill. And then when I had a draft bill, I sent it to Rachel and her team, and they looked at it and sent it back. And we had a little bit of a negotiation. It wasn't anything major, but so they rolled it into the similar model of the frequency of the diabetes training, from what I remember.
Yeah, and it could be that your schools are already, if you do either doing seizure training or doing seizure action plan. I know because my mother works in a high school in Washington State, and so I brought this up and I said, oh, this is going to be coming to you. Of course, she had a kid with epilepsy, so she, is aware. And I said, oh, and a seizure action plan for each student, and she was like, we already do that. Do people not do that? So I think some districts are ahead of the curve, but for others, this will be new.
Well, I have two sisters that are in education in California, and I ran it past both of them, and they said they had no seizure training in their credential programs. So you would think that would be something they would build into credential training, is seizure first aid training, but maybe one day.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Rachel or Tyler? All right. Well, I want to thank Rachel for doing this. And
I want to thank Tyler. Tyler is new at the foundation and is clearly great. So we're pretty excited to have him.
Absolutely.
We're just going around in circles. I'd like to thank Kevin, and we can all thank one person down the line. And everybody can get a thank you today.
All right. Well, anything comes up, of course, email me. Rachel's available. And maybe we'll get her to Oregon one day. She came to our camp in Washington when she was in town because she still has family here. Thank you again, Rachel and Tyler. And this concludes day 1 or day 2.